Asalamualaikum guys, I hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. Today I'll be starting my Python tutorial series, and in this first video I'll be going through some of the basics for starting on Python for beginners. If you haven't ever programmed before, don't worry, we'll go through everything slowly and in depth. You can of course follow along with what I do in the video, pause and familiarize with steps, so you can smoothly move along with me to the more advanced stuff. Awesome. So here's the website python.org/downloads where you can get it from. Pretty simple. Click on this button and you should get the executable file of the latest Python 3.9 version for your PC. Click on that file and the install launcher should open up. Now before clicking install now, it's best to check the box here that says add Python to path. What that'll do is attach the Python directory files to the environment variables path in your PC. And what that means is that you shouldn't have any issues with launching Python in your PC once it's installed. Go on ahead and click install now. I'm not going to do that because I already have Python 3.8 installed on my PC, so I'll cancel it, but you can continue with your installation. Just to note on the versions of Python, it doesn't matter if you've downloaded, let's say, version 3.5 or 3.6, because most of the coding I'll do should work for any version of Python 3. Alright, so once you've installed Python, you'll find an application called IDLE in your PC, which stands for Integrated Development and Learning Environment. And I can search it on my Windows like this, and it'll be right there. Then go on ahead and click on the app. You'll see the console for Python open up. Let me adjust the console right here. Okay. So if you're opening IDLE for the first time, you wouldn't see the font size as big as this. That's because I've increased the font size for your ease of reading in this tutorial. You could do the same and maybe even change styles of the font by just going on options and configure IDLE, and that's where you can change styles and the font size. So it was set to 10 as default, but I amped it up to 20, so you can then apply and click OK and we're good to go. Alright, so here on the console you can type in simple lines of Python code and have them run right away. I can just type in hello guys, for example, and when I click enter, the statement hello guys gets printed out. Similarly, with numbers, I can type in 20, click enter, the number 20 gets printed out. Now you're probably thinking, what does print mean here? Well, this is known as the print function, and this takes in values that can be sent as an output to be displayed here on the console. And since we're already on the console, we can type in hello guys without the print function, and when we click enter, the statement hello guys is printed out with single quotes. I can do something trivial as 2 plus 2, and when I click enter, the number 4 gets printed out. So now you're probably wondering, what's the point of having the print function when we can type out the code directly and run them? Well, for the most of our part, we wouldn't be using the console to write code, but rather we'll be writing code on Python scripts known by the file format .py. So let's make a new .py file. Click new file here, and we have a new blank .py file. Let's save it as intro.py on the desktop. You can do that if you want. And now I'll speak a little bit about Python. So Python is known as one of the most readable languages when compared to other languages. And you'll get to see a lot of syntax that is quite user-friendly and easy to understand. And when we're starting out in any programming language, it's best to get to know about their fundamentals. In the case of Python, I'll be discussing data types and variables. I'll start talking about the four main data types, starting with strings, short for str here in purple. And this data type represents textual data. So just like the hello guys statement on the console here, Python reads this as a string data type because it's been enclosed by the quotation marks. So another example would be something like Bob William, and if I were to print this string on my script, the result will be sent to the console right here. You can see the name Bob William here. And I could also generate strings with single quotes. So let's just replace the double quotes with the single quotes. Now that I click run, and the same name gets printed out right here. Awesome. So these are the two ways in generating strings. So we had Bob William, and we can also have numbers within our string. So let's say 100 or the number 1. and anything else is gibberish, I guess. And these are some of the ways in making strings. And the next data type I'll talk about is the integer, short for int data type in Python. And this data type, it represents whole numbers. So just like the number 20 and 2 that I typed here on the console, Python would read them as the integer type. So another example could be 4, 5, or 100, or however big a number you like. As long as it's a whole number, it's considered the integer type. Similarly, with another numerical data type called float, this one represents decimal numbers, so something like 3.5 or 0.987 or even just 0.5, and these are considered float numbers. And lastly, I'll be talking about Boolean data type, known short for bool. This data type represents two values, or rather the two truth values of logic, known as true and false. And you can see the two values here are highlighted in orange. That's because they're reserved for Python as the Boolean values. So if I were to type out true and false but all in lowercase, they're not highlighted in orange anymore, and Python wouldn't recognize them as any data type really. So just remember to mention the first letters of true and false as uppercase, and that way Python will know that, yep, they're Boolean. Awesome. And we can also print these data types out to the console. So let's say I wanted to print out true and false. And by the way, you can put in more values within your print function. They just have to be separated by a comma. And that way, when I click run, you'll see the two bool values get printed out to the console here. And I guess that's a pretty awesome thing regarding data types. And that's pretty much it on data types, really. I'm going to now discuss about variables. So back in school, maybe in 5th or 8th grade, you might have heard about variables in the math class maybe, where let's say the teacher asked you to find the value of x in algebra, probably. And in Python, it is really that simple to make variables where you can, let's say, put a value x equals 2. And guess what? You've just now made a variable as how Python would read it as some variable name x equals to the integer type 2. And it is really awesome and simple as that, because in other languages, maybe if you had experience in Java, let's say, you'd remember that if you wanted to make a variable assigned to some integer, you have to mention its data type at the beginning, then the variable name equals to your value, and close the line with a semicolon. And that's not the case in Python, which is pretty awesome and simple. And I can also assign variable names to other data types. So let's say I wanted this string Bob within a variable name Bob, or even the Boolean within a variable name true. And now if I print out Bob and true, click run, then you'll see that both Bob and true are printed out to the console. Pretty awesome regarding variables, I guess. And that's one thing regarding variables. The next thing I'll talk about is the naming restrictions with variables. So in Python, variables are valid if and only if the names of the variables start with text. So if I were to, let's say, type for men and just a string for men here, for example, and if I were to print this variable out to the console, you'll see that the program will run to an error. Let's run it. And it says invalid syntax. And that's because Python would see variable name starting with numbers or any symbols as an invalid variable name. So you have to remember to start your variable names with text. And after that, after any text, be it just the letter M or men, you could include underscores or numbers or both actually. And now it's a valid variable name. So let's run it and send it to the console. Let me click enter, run module. and now you see the string format gets printed out here. So I guess that's pretty straightforward and something to keep mindful of regarding variable names. The next thing I'll talk about is the similarity in variable names. So let's say I had a variable named data, and I put this string data in here. And let's say I had another similar variable name, but with a different value, just say my name, for example. And now when I print out the variable data into the console by clicking run, you'll probably expect that the data variable will print out two values, right? Let's see if your theory is correct. And you see that only one value is printed out, and that's because when we're defining a variable, again, in any next line of code, but with a different value, that latest value will then update the variable, and the variable will remove the old value. And that's one thing regarding variables and updating the value for your variable name. So one thing to keep in mind regarding variables, if I were to, let's say, change the variable name just a bit by uppercasing the first letter, and now that I click run module, you'll see that the first variable with all lowercase data, when I print it out, now the word data is printed out to the console. And you see that although the variable names are same, you would expect the data variable to update with the latest value, and that doesn't happen because Python reads these two variables as completely different variable names. So another thing to keep mindful of is if you want to update the same variable, you would have to use the exact same variable name. If it was all in lowercase, then to update the variable, you have to use the exact same name and assign it to a different value. And you could also test this with, let's say, all uppercase data, and I just put in some name, I don't know, super, just a word. And now if I print the middle variable data, click run, you'll see that only fars gets printed out and it's not updated with super. That's because the variable named data in all uppercase is different than the variable name with data with the first letter as uppercase. So that's pretty much it actually regarding data types and variables. And I'll be talking more about how to put these data types into action, starting with strings in the next tutorial, and maybe more on operations. But yeah, this was pretty much it, starting with some basics in Python. And you'll get to see a lot of syntax that'll be quite user-friendly and easy and readable to understand in Python, which will be quite awesome. And well, hoping to see you in the next video. That's pretty much it for today. And if you liked the video, then give it a like or a subscribe. Stay tuned. Thank you very much then. Asalamualaikum.